Harold didn't mind dying alone. He had lived a busy life, and it was not without heartbreak. He had a wife and 3 children, and walked with them all until they reached the end of their lives. And somehow he was still here, left behind. So he did what he could. He buried them. He remembered them. And then he carried on, because there was nothing else to do. Harold died early on a Tuesday morning, in his sleep. He didn't even notice his breath catch in his throat, did not wake to the low wheeze of his lungs contracting slower and slower. He just went away. His death did not occur to him until Harold stood alone in a white, featureless room. He had fallen asleep in his jeans and plaid shirt. Most days he was too tired to bother changing. He kept himself busy, because when he sat in the quiet for too long, he could hear the hollowness of his family home echo through his very bones. And so he woke, upright in his favourite old shirt, and stared around at the empty room for a moment. His heart pounded deep in his belly, the low hum of anxiety. For a moment, he thought this really was the afterlife. Nothing and nobody. Forever. And then the people began appearing, one by one, face by smiling face. Rosie, the little girl who high-fived him every day. He spent his mornings as a crossing guard at the elementary school his sons had gone to 3 decades ago. He could see their faded joy in the way the skipping, shrieking children scattered by him every day. There was a part of him who felt the call to keep them safe like little lambs. All those children came running and playing past him, crying out, "Hey, Mr. Davis!" before carrying on in their play. The room seemed to grow around the people who filled it. There was his neighbour, who passed away a couple of years earlier, Mrs. Keller, an old woman, frail as a dry flower. He used to collect her mail, shovel her driveway when he shoveled his, raked her leaves. She had told him he reminded her of her lost son. He wanted to tell her she reminded him of his wife, in her final days, when her skin was like a thin tarp stretched over her bone. But the words lodged in his throat, and he could only manage, "I'm happy to help." Mrs. Keller shuffled over on her ancient legs and gripped his arm. "We've all been waiting a long time for you," she said in her sunflower-sweet voice, her smile just as warm as it had ever been. "What is this place?" he murmured back. As they spoke, people kept appearing. His favourite cashier at the grocery store, who chatted with him every Sunday, whose work he commended to her manager. The children he read to at the library. The boy he had tried to save in Vietnam, Patrick, who stepped on a bomb from who knows which side, and his left leg disappeared like a cloud of smoke. Harold hauled him 12 hours through the jungle, damned if he would let his fellow soldier lay there and die. The boy died that night from blood loss and shock, and Harold was there, listening to his last words, because someone had to. Someone had to bear witness to all this. He had been barely more than a boy himself at the time. That experience had harrowed him to his bone, shaped him into the man he became. "This is where we all go." His old neighbour gripped his forearm with a strength that surprised him. "This is where we get to see all the people we've mattered to. All the people we've helped or hurt." She smiled at it all like she was watching the loveliest show in the world. That's who Harold was. A helper. And when he died alone, the room swelled with people he had not seen in decades. His parents were there, classmates, co-workers, neighbours, strangers who he could no longer recognize. At the back of the room, Harold saw his wife up on her tiptoes, straining to see him over the shoulders of all these dozens of strangers. Their children flocked near her, somehow adults and children all at once. But they had always felt that way to him, there would always be the tiny, wailing, helpless babies he had once held, no matter how old they got, no matter how big they fucked up. Mrs. Keller caught the trail of his stare and smiled. She's been talking about you since the moment I got here. I don't think she talks about anything else. Harold couldn't think of a good answer. He didn't even try. He ran to hug his wife for the first time in 17 long years. This story was written by Reddit user ecstaticandinsatiate. For more like it, visit www.reddit.com/r/shoringupfragments. The background music used is Cold by Jorge Mendez. This has been a Kazhik Narrates production. If you would like a piece narrated, please email me at kazhik.narrates@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.